Hello and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for joining. Hello to a special stream today with David Allen and Michael Hunger on my side. Well, I'm not important here today, but we have an interesting session today with Aura Office Hours. So I'm looking forward to that. So that's going to be cool. Thank you for joining, David and Michael. Thank you all for joining on the stream. Quick intro again from my side. Let us know where you're watching this from. And if you already have prepared any questions, type them in chat or use the Slido link we have already shared in chat. I will post it one more time in a moment. Until then, maybe either David or Michael, do you want to give us a quick overview of what's going on today?
Yeah,
Sure.
I guess welcome all first, and then David will take it on to do the intro.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. I mean, the reason we put together these sessions is that we see a whole lot of people trying out AuraDB free, and they're building all sorts of cool things with it. But, you know, as you're learning any kind of new technology, sometimes you need some help along the way. And we wanted to make ourselves available to answer questions. So today is not going to be a long presentation where we've got a zillion slides, where we're going to teach you all the fundamentals of Neo4j. Although we'd be happy to do that for you in another forum. What we'd like to do today is get your questions and see what you're doing as practitioners, where you're getting stuck, and work through those issues. So my name's David Allen. I'm the Senior Director of Developer Relations here at Neo4j. I have been using graphs for, I don't know, maybe something like 11 years now. And I first started off by running into a problem that I just couldn't solve with MySQL and Postgres. And so I reached out to some of my friends. I said, you know, how can I get around this? They introduced me to graphs in Neo4j, and I adopted it and kind of never looked back. So that's a little bit about me. Michael?
Yeah, and I'm Michael Hunger. I'm Senior Director for User Innovation at Neo4j, and my goal is to make every user of Neo4j happy and successful with what they're doing. So showing examples, building tools, you know, demonstrating how to use technology, showing how to combine it with other databases, other technologies, and helping people all over the world with their questions. And that's what we want to do today. So bring your questions, and we're happy to answer all of them, show you how it's done. So it's not just talk track, but we'll actually can live demo and show things. So feel free to ask us anything, and then hopefully we can answer everything. So let's see.
That's why you're running for president, right? According to
Pleased to have you joining us here today. So if you like, Michael, like while we give people a chance to put their questions into Slido, if you're wondering where to put your questions, just look at the screen that's shared. There's a link up there, dev.neo4j.com/aura-ama-01. If you go there, you're going to be able to put in a question or comment under your name or anonymously. And you can also vote up other people's questions if you see a question that's interesting to you. And in general, as questions come in, we will try to handle them in their order of vote. So with that, Michael, do you want to start off with one of the questions we got before the session began?
Actually, let me do something else. Just share my screen really quick. So for those people that might be interested in Aura but don't know how to, you know, get started with a database, I just really quickly want to show how to create a new database. So you basically go to Aura databases, create database, and then you basically say, I want to have a free database. No credit card required. There's some limits to it, but you can, many example that's fit nicely into the limits. They are auto-paused after 3 days of inactivity, but you can always resume them when you need them, or if you continue to use them, they're not paused actually. So we just give them a name. This database we just call AMA, so you can pick a region that's close to you, either Europe West, US Central, or Asia. So I'll pick Belgium. And then you can either pick an existing data set or a blank database. And I think I'll just do the blank database. This screen is quite important. So it's, as you all know, usually we skip over these pop-up screens, but don't do this here because you need to copy and save this password somewhere. So I'll basically just copy this password somewhere so it's safe. I don't lose it. And then I say I have stored the credentials for later use. And then I see this database being created, and it takes 2 to 3 minutes for the provisioning of the database. And then when we'll get back here, then we can actually look at what we can do with this database. So that's just the first few steps that you can take for getting there. So, but otherwise, let's look at the first question. How do backups work with Aura Free? How can I get my data out? That's actually a double question, right? So one is kind of about backups, and the other one is how can I get data out? Backups are one option, but there are also some other options of getting the data out. So if you go to our Aura screen again, so I have a few more databases running. There's a difference between free databases and pro databases. So I currently don't have a free running, so we need to wait until my fresh one is started. So I'll first show you how to do it with an AuraDB Pro. Basically, you go to the database screen, and then under snapshots, basically you have daily backups, and you can from here download the backup, export, and it will basically create a dump file. So I think this was offshore leaks.
Yeah. So if I can add something here, Michael, like when you get data out of Aura like this, you're getting a dump file. And so in our tooling, if you look up Neo4j's operations manual, there's a tool called Neo4j Admin. And so you can do Neo4j Admin load from one of those dump files into a database that's within desktop or any other kind. You can also create a new Aura database from that dump file. These dump files are a little bit different than the full backup sets that are documented in the Neo4j ops manual. So we're dealing with dump files here.
Yeah, exactly. And so this dump file, so I just added this to Neo4j desktop, and I can now, with this dump file that I just added here, I can say, create a new DBMS from the dump or import it into an existing DBMS. So I can create an AMA database, give it a name, and then for some reason my create button doesn't work, but if I hit enter, it works. So it used to work yesterday. I don't know what happened here. So it will load this dump file into the database, and then in a few seconds we'll see it. But you can also do it manually as such. So if we go to an Neo4j installation, let's see. Let me just open a new folder here. So if I have a locally installed Neo4j, then you basically can just call bin Neo4j admin load, and then from home downloads ama dot, oops, what was this? Something else? ama.dump. What do you call it? Oh no, offshore leaks.dump, not ama.dump, offshore leaks.dump. And then you can provide a database name, but if you don't provide it, it would load it into the active database here. So I could say database offshore leaks, and it would import this into this database. Or it already exists, so offshore leaks 2.
So the opposite way also works, where if you had a desktop database, you could create a dump file from that, and then you could upload that into Aura and create a new Aura. You could populate an Aura instance from a dump file that you had if you were already using Community, for example.
Exactly. So that's here under import database. So we can basically here select a dump file and get going. And that actually takes me to another thing that I wanted to show. We'll probably also have our fresh database over here. So what we can do here is we can upload this dump file that David just mentioned. So we have a bunch of examples as well. So if you don't have your own dump file, we have under Neo4j graph examples on GitHub. We have a bunch of examples that you can use. So for instance, here's one that's called cybersecurity, which is really fresh. And here under data, we have all these dump files. So we can basically download this dump file, cybersecurity AD44, and then hopefully this is the right one. And then I can select this dump file and from my download. and upload it into my freshly. Oh, this was the wrong one. Good that I checked, because I didn't want to override my offshore leaks one. I wanted to send it to the AMA database. So I just select a dump file and then click open, and it will upload it into the database. And now in a second or two, it should change here into like loading state. And then, as you can see here, it now imports this dump file into Aura. So from that perspective, you can basically, from these graph examples, you pick any kind of use case, network management, Twitch, Twitter, Stack Overflow. So all of them have dump files as well. So that's kind of the main way how to get data out of and in of Neo4j Aura.
Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about the backup schedule and differences between free and pro?
Yes. So let's look at the pro one first. So the pro one has daily backups. And you see they're also kept. And then you can either restore from that backup or download the backup or even create a new database from that backup or snapshot. So for instance, if you want to compare two databases or to like last week's database with the current database, then you can use that. And you see I have here many pages of kept backups as such. You can also take a snapshot, which is kind of on demand in Aura Pro. And in Aura Free, we need to wait until the loading is done, because otherwise we can't go back to the snapshot. But in Aura Free, basically there's no daily backup, there's just on-demand snapshot. So you basically have a take snapshot button like this one here, and it takes a single snapshot and then makes it available as such. So it takes a few seconds more to finish with the loading, and then we can look at the data as such. Cool. There are some other ways of how you can get data out of your database. So for instance, if I have, let's say, the offshore leaks database here, and I have Neo4j browser. So if you have only like small volumes of data in Neo4j, then you can also use the offshore leaks. Just need to get the password. Then you can also use Neo4j browser to just run a query on your data and then export the results, for instance, to CSV. So for instance, if I want to export the data of entities, return entity.name, for instance, and entity.jurisdiction limit 20. So we have like this data, then I can just here download this data as CSV or JSON as well. So that's for small volumes of data. And then there are also a number of epoch procedures that can actually stream data back to the client. So this is a little bit more of an involved topic. So if you're interested in that, you can Google for epoch export. And then there's explanations of how you can export to different formats, and most of these functions supporting streaming back. So because in Aura, we can't write to the disk as such, but there's a stream config in epoch that allows you to write back results in CSV, JSON, Cypher, and GraphML, and so on. So, but that's a little bit more involved as such. Cool. Is our database restored? It's not yet restored, so we can probably look at the next question.
Sure. Let's mark that one off.
Do you want to take this one, David? Next one.
Sure. We get questions about query logs inside of Aura. Alex, if we could switch back to the slides, I have one picture of this that I put together. So if you're having trouble with a particular query, right now AuraDB free doesn't have access to the underlying Neo4j query log, so you can't see a roll by roll of all the different queries that have executed. However, the database does have a number of procedures built in internally that lets you see what's running and get full stats on them in terms of the CPU usage, the memory utilization, the number of threads, how long it's been waiting, and so on and so forth. And this information is like super valuable for diagnosing problems with your queries. I'm only showing you the first three columns in this particular slide, like you get a query ID, the username, but you're going to be able to see like whether parameters were submitted with the query, what the actual text of the cipher is, and so forth. And so by just using call dbms.list queries, you can also, for example, yield some of those values out and then restrict it. So you could say, show me only the queries that are coming from my Python driver, for example, by just using Cypher with call dbms.list queries. If you had a query that was really problematic, you can terminate it. You can also use a different function that's for terminating transactions to terminate an entire transaction. So if you're executing a transaction against a database that includes multiple different pieces of query work, you could either kill the transaction or you could kill the individual queries depending on what you wanted to do. You could also look at the resource utilization of the whole transaction or just an individual query within a transaction. So most people, when they're running queries, they're thinking that a query and a transaction is the same thing. And most of the time they are. But it's possible with Neo4j to create a transaction and then to run 3 or 4 queries within that. So for that reason, there's a separation within the system of transaction and query level, and you can look at either one if you want. So on this particular picture, like where you're likely to see this crop up is you might run a query that just seems to hang and never return anything. And my sample query here was call apoc.util.sleep. So since apoc is just going to sleep and do nothing, we know that query is not going to come back for a very, very, very long time. And so that allows us to investigate it and then optionally kill it on the right-hand side. So as I got more sophisticated with AuraDB, I learned how to write call dbms.list queries and then order the results by a particular field so that you could use it just like a task monitor in your operating system. You could say, well, show me the ones that are using the most CPU, or show me the ones that have been waiting the longest, or show me the ones that are being executed by a particular driver, like we mentioned. So this is just the simplest example of the kinds of things that you can do. All of this stuff is in the operations manual for Neo4j. That's the link at the bottom of the screen. If you go to dev.neo4j.com/query management, you're going to see this query that I'm talking about, as well as like all of the other degrees of freedom that you can do with this. Michael, is there anything you want to add here?
Yeah, there are 2 things that I wanted to add. One is, of course, because these procedure calls or also short transactions, like the new syntax is called, is composable. So you can have like one part of your query kind of listing the top 5 long-running transactions, and then you kill them, for instance, right? So you basically do one statement that gets you all the queries that run longer for, let's say, like more than 15 minutes. But then you can also automatically kill them as such as well. So you can have also like a script that kills long-running things. But I think Aura also has an long-running transaction timeout, or at least a memory timeout, right? So if your query consumes too much memory, actually Aura will abort it so that the database doesn't get into trouble. The other thing that I wanted to mention is there's a really cool command in Cypher called profile or explain that actually shows you the query plan. So what does your query look like under the hood when Neo4j executes it, which is often very helpful to spot like bottlenecks or places where you forgot to create an index, or a place where you thought you're kind of just connecting 2 nodes, but you're actually creating a Cartesian product of like 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 or something like that, and then it explodes. And so explain and profile show you very well what it looks like under the hood. And if you want to, we can have also a look at that as well.
Well, why don't we take a quick look at that? So for folks who are watching on the stream on Slido, the link is at the top of the screen here that we're streaming. You can ask any question. We've actually thrown up a poll here on Slido at the moment where you can let us know basically how much experience that you've got with Neo4j. We're going to do a couple of fun polls during the course of the hour as we go along. Check the chat if you need, go back to the top of the chat screen if you need to find that link to where you can ask us a question. Michael, you want to show that off?
Yeah, let me do that. 1 second. So I can share my screen again. Yeah. So this is the poll. Our M8 database is now also ready to run, and that's actually one where we can check this. So this is the freshly loaded cybersecurity example. And I just grab my password that I saved, paste this in here. And then we can look at the data that we just uploaded. So you see that it will made it in, right? So this is the cybersecurity domain with computers, groups, users, and allowances, and things like that. So imagine we do now like an expensive query, right? So let's say we match all the users and match also all the computers and also all the groups, right? And return the total, something like this, like how many are there of this. So if I run this with explain prefix, I see that actually it's smarter than I am, right? It's because it just gets the counts from the count store and returns the total. So that's actually not why I wanted. Neo4j is too smart for me. So where u.name contains an A, and then so this looks better, right? So you see already that these kind of 3 node by label scans and 1 node index contains scan, they are kind of multiplied together in Cartesian products, and you see here that this is too much, right? So, and I don't want to have like 140,000 rows being created. And if I run this with profile, then I actually see when the query finishes, what actually happened. So how many database operations happened here, how many database rows are created in between. And so I can see this. And so, oops, sorry. So there's the new, the things that David showed is called dbms list transactions and list queries and so on. So you see this. So if I run this again, which takes a few seconds, and this one, then I see, okay, here, this is kind of this query running. And you see elapsed time millis, how much it waited, how much memory it allocated, page hits, page cache hits, and so on. So there's a lot of detail in here to get into that. There's a new syntax in 4.x for this that's called show transactions, which is no longer a procedure. And it has similar fields. It doesn't have everything because you need to say yield star to get all the fields, right? So there's even more now as such. So if I run this again, then I can get all this detail from this query as well. Exactly. So that's kind of what I can do with profile and explain, and then kind of using show transactions, kill transaction, or show queries, list queries, and kill queries as well. And if you have a long-running query that just runs, then you can also use this stop sign here in the browser to kill it. This will also abort the transactions in the database as well. Cool. I think that's what I wanted to show in terms of profile, explain, and the other things as well. We had a question in between from Wim who wanted to look at Neo. Well, you have to pronounce for me ancestry data. So I thought that could be an interesting one to look at. So we, because a colleague asked me actually this week if I can help him input some family ancestry data. So I found this Python library. Was it this one? No, Python getcom. So there was something this one here. Which where I wrote basically, I took the example and wrote a small scripted export CSVs from getcom, and so I applied it to an presidential data file. So there is find this home downloads presidents. The president 2020 is the original file, which is a really horrible text format. This getcom format, as you can see. Right, it's like from the COBOL ages, basically. And then I turned this into a CSV where you have a person, their name, their ID, and their parents, just as a minimal example on how to do this, right? So, and then you can actually use this data and use this upcoming tool from Neo4j called Data Importer. I can load the CSV into it and then say, I just map this to a person. who has a parent, and then I say I map from this precedence file first name, last name, birth, and ID to the person. And to the relationship, we basically pick the same file. Oops, we forgot to select an ID. And for a relationship, we basically pick the same file and say from person ID to parent one, just for simplicity's sake, right? So we just get one parent in here. And then we can use our database. In this case, I can pick my AMA database, copy the connection URL into the data importer. Now I press Command B instead of Command V. Neo4j is the username, and I get the password from my secret password storage on the other screen. And I say run, and it will import this people data, which is 2,300 presidents and their families with 1,200 relationships. And if I look into my Aura AMA database that we just opened, then there should be now a person node here as a new one, but with parent relationships, right? So we can also look at the parent relationship here and say, okay, this I just don't want to have like one step, but let's say 5 steps or something like that, right? So you have these kind of chains of people. So this is kind of now showing the last name only, but I can also select like first name. So you can see like all these histories in here. So that's just a simplistic way of how to take a data file of some format, just use a Python script like this one, turn it into CSV, and then we can use actually data importer to quickly get it into Neo4j Aura as we have here. So that was for the question for them. I hope that helps a little bit. Cool. Super. Do we want to look at the next question? Oh, actually, yeah. No, it's okay. Do we want to look at the next question?
Yeah, the next question deals with how we might go about visualizing data, visualizing graph data. And I think that there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. Alex, if it's possible, if we can put the AMA address up while we're screen sharing, like in the caption or in the outer side, that would be nice. So when we're visualizing graph data, like we can do this with broadly 3 kinds of techniques. One is you can do it directly inside of browser. So as Michael was showing a minute ago, browser is this visual query shell where you can execute any kind of cipher that you want, and you have the option to visualize it as a graph. Of course, the browser will also let you look at it as a set of textual records, or it will let you look at it as JSON as well, like on those little buttons on the left-hand side of what Michael is showing right now. So this type of visualization that's done in browser is typically called like a force-directed visualization. And so Neo4j lays it out for you, and it's this very kind of springy kind of model where the nodes kind of repel one another, and they kind of lay out like, Michael, if you could do something like match n, return n, limit 100 or something like that, just to do something like a little bit crazy with it, you can kind of see this this animation and this springiness that I'm talking about inside of browser. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so these things, yeah, you can see that these things can get really complicated when you're visualizing it in this way. And so a second option that's offered for everybody who's using AuraDB is to use a tool called Aura. And so sometimes people get confused about where to see this. So can you back up just a second? I want to make sure that people see that explicitly, Michael. So when you go to the console, there's an open with button on the right-hand side, and Neo4j Bloom is the second option in there. This is a really powerful visualization tool. You can use it with any database. Great, go ahead, Michael.
Yep. Okay, and here we have our database. I'll just pick my password again. We connect to the database. And then it interestingly asks you, what do you actually want to show? Do you want to show the whole database, or do you want to show a subset of the database? So you can create these, what they call perspectives. And so you can basically manage these perspectives, create new perspectives, and so on. So for instance, if I only want to have my person, so it automatically created this perspective with all the stuff in here. So which I can say I want to use this, or you can also create new build perspectives or start with a blank perspective as well if you wanted to, right? So that's all possible. And so for instance, if I pick this full perspective, then I could say, I want to find computers that are connected to a user directly, for instance, right? So I have computer to user. And then I run this and I get this, again, a force-directed layout. But I have this node in the middle here, which is connected to a lot of things, right? So let me just do the following. I want to, which one is this? What's the easiest way of doing this? Let's see. So I want to just select a bunch of the nodes in my graph. So I just select them here and just right click and say dismiss others. So this is kind of a limited set of my graph. And then I can say, okay, I actually don't want to show them as this springy layout, but as an more structured tree layout as such, right? So you see kind of this node is on this level, these other nodes are on this level, and then the next level with the other nodes. And so you can show hierarchies, for instance, vertically or horizontally, like you can switch them around as well. So left to right, basically as well.
So Bloom is a really deep tool. There's a lot of stuff going on there. They also have this idea of search phrases with Bloom, where you can define cipher queries that pull up what you want, and you can use an English-like language in the search bar. Some people at Neo4j actually call it Bloomlish. Anyway, you could use something like Bloomlish to search for what you're looking for. You could say entities connected to such and such, and then you could define connected to as being implemented by a particular cipher query. But Michael, we've got some other questions coming in. Maybe we can return to a little bit more depth on Bloom in a few minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, cool.
So you want to start off with it? You want me to take this JDBC question, or you want to take it?
You can take it. That's good.
Okay, so the question is how to use apocloadjdbc from Aura. So the way apocloadjdbc works when you're in a desktop environment is that it uses native Java APIs, and typically to connect to, let's say, Oracle or Postgres, you're going to have an extra jar installed. Now, this particular approach isn't going to be possible on Aura Free because we don't have a way of importing third-party jar dependencies. So in general, there's going to be a better way to go about loading data from a relational database. Typically, when people are trying to do apocloadjdbc, what they're really trying to do is get data out of Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, something along those lines, and into Neo4j. Michael, do you want to give them some extra options for how they can do this instead of apocloadjdbc?
Yeah, that's a great point. So there are several options. So one is you just take the data from a relational database, export it to CSV, and import it with either the data importer into or with load CSV when you know how to write cipher statements. The other option is in Neo4j desktop. There's a tool called ETL tool under tools here, which allows you to connect to relational databases and then basically connect to a relational database and then connect to an Aura database as well and send the data there. Other ways of doing that is using something like change data capture with Kafka Connect and use the Neo4j Kafka integration there. So we can Neo4j labs Kafka, which is this one, and so the Kafka integration has a Confluent Cloud, but also cloud-based Kafka Connect integration that allows you to read and write to Neo4j from other databases, for instance. So
there's another option to use a Spark integration where you basically pull data out of a relational database using the Spark connector, and then you push the records into Aura from there. So one of the things I want to point out to kind of cover this is like apocloadjdbc runs everything inside of the database. And so it's like if you're moving data from one system to another, the old way of doing that was to do everything inside of the database. But typically, like if you have a one-off need where you just need to move the data once, typically exporting to CSV and then loading using the data importer or load CSV is going to be your easiest option. If you have a repeated need, like let's say you need to keep this data fresh and it's got to be, you know, every 3 hours, you're going to load incrementally all of those records. So here, like I've worked with a bunch of customers on their systems, and it pays to separate the integration out into a third component. You could do it with Spark, you could do it with Kafka, you could do it with a third-party program, but ultimately it's harder to schedule and maintain and stay on top of if it's inside of your database. So best practice is to do that externally with the ETL tool, Spark, Kafka, or a separate driver program. I hope that about answers the question.
Or other ETL tools, right? So there are also like Apache Hop, there's Talent, there's NiFi, there's lots of different tools that have integrations for Neo4j.
So the principle behind all of those different options, whatever suits your use case best, is that you got a database here, you got a database there, and then we're creating a third thing in the middle, which is the integration between the two. And that third thing is something that you can version control and manage and understand and so forth, rather than having it be, you know, a component of the database itself.
Yeah. There's also, I need to find what is here. If you're kind of wondering which parts of APOC are supported within Aura, there's actually a documentation page here, which I can also put into the chat, that shows which parts of APOC are supported within Aura. So in general, it's kind of large parts of APOC core, but there are some exceptions for security and other reasons that are excluded. But you can always refer back to here to this docs page to make sure you see what's supported within Aura as such.
Okay, so we got about 20 minutes left. We still have a couple questions to get through. One is from Clement. So Michael already gave Clement some feedback. Looking for some clarification here.
Yeah, so so this is a question about like a GraphQL application setup. So in general, if I might steal just arrows for a new graph. So basically you have a Neo4j database here, right? And then somewhere you have a middleware, so GraphQL middleware that sits in front of Neo4j and basically sends requests or queries to Neo4j, right? So Neo4j itself is hosted on Aura, AuraDB. And then your clients are mobile clients or web apps or you name it, basically that talk to your GraphQL middleware, right? And then of course there are external services like Auth0. That's one example, right? There are many other services like Sentry and then so on. But Auth0 is one authentication service that helps you with, you know, verifying and managing JWTs and so on. And usually what you do in a GraphQL middleware, you have your main processing, which is kind of your business layer that sends queries to Neo4j or other databases or other GraphQL APIs as such, composes the results, and then sends this back to the client. But oftentimes you also have additional services that you want to call, and then you can either use something like GraphQL resolvers, or actually in your Apollo server middleware, you can say, I have a like a before function. Before my GraphQL request is executed, I actually take the HTTP header that brings along the user token, go to Auth0 with that, use the Auth0 client library, verify that, get credentials back from Auth0, like scope and what permissions does the user have, how long does the token still last, when does it expire, and then you can enrich your context object in GraphQL with that, and then downstream in the GraphQL middleware you can use it, or you can even pass it as parameters in your queries to Neo4j as well. So that's how you would integrate Auth0. There's also some documentation in the GraphQL docs Neo4j docs to just show off our new and shiny docs page. So there's the Neo4j GraphQL library. The Neo4j GraphQL library has a full chapter on authorization, how you set it up, auth directives, how do you can you limit access to certain fields and other things, but also how to integrate it with resolvers as well. So there's a lot of stuff with like custom resolvers and so on, how you can work with them as well. And for GrandStack, I already shared some of the links with Clemens in Discord. By the way, if you have questions outside of our office hours, feel free to drop into our Discord. So in dev.neo4j.com, neo4j.com/chat gets you to our Discord channel server, and you can ask questions there as well. Cool.
Great. You want to go to Clemens' next question?
How would you index a Google Drive? Yeah, perhaps David, you want to take this because that's also like a modeling question, right? So, and then like it's a larger question. How do you index in file system basically, or turn in a file system, or like a document system into a knowledge graph?
So you can. There's a couple of different ways of approaching that. Let me take it from a couple of different directions. So first of all, Google Drive has an API just like anything else, and you can get the API hooks for any programming language. So Python, JavaScript, Golang, whatever you're into, you could get a manifest of everything that's in Google Drive. You can also access the actual file contents. Now, one way of going about this is that you could basically put the file and folder structure into Neo4j, and then you would have like a big tree of files and directories just like any other. Another way of going about it would be to use other APIs, and we have built for a bunch of customers basically things like extraction pipelines that turn piles of documents into a knowledge graph. And so like a really common example of this would be, let's say you're a medical business and you get all of these patient reports. What they will sometimes do is they'll send a patient report or a disease report through a special kind of document AI, and you can get cloud services from Google and Amazon that do these sorts of things. And they will extract from it key value information, like who was the patient, what was the age, the gender of the patient, and so forth. And so basically you can use these cloud services to transform the content of a document into a JSON representation of what's in the document. This can work for any kind of document under the sun. It can even work for pictures and images, because there are APIs nowadays where you can extract what objects or people or animals are depicted inside of a picture. So basically, you can build these kinds of pipelines that will extract any kind of metadata that you want out of unstructured data like files. And you can build metadata and tags like Michael is sketching up right now. And you start to then hang those off of the document. And so the document, in case, it might be a JPEG. And inside of the JPEG, you might say, well, it's a picture of a horse, or it was posted by this person, or it was created on this particular date. Those are examples of authors and metadata. So as you merge those things into the graph, things are going to start to get interlinked. So Michael's picturing this in his model as like a single document. But as you start adding lots of documents, you're going to start to see documents share authors. They share creation dates. They share tags and so forth. And so all of those documents start to get knit together in a way. You're going to start to have documents with common metadata tags and entities and so forth. That then, when you really populate this out, comprises your knowledge graph on the basis of those files and folders. And so some of the really cool things we've seen people do with this is they'll take a knowledge graph like this, extracted from unstructured data, and they'll use it to power a chatbot, for example. You can go to a Slack channel or a Telegram instance or whatever the case may be, and you can ask the bot a question. The bot will then turn the question into Cypher and will answer it from the knowledge graph and then give you a result back. So you've got this pipeline feeding all of these documents in, and the bot is getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And basically all it's doing is it's running connected Cypher queries to discover knowledge that the questioner doesn't know about from common linkages that it found in that knowledge graph. So You can do this from anywhere, like really, really simple to really, really complex. Like at the bottom end, like the simplest way to start is you get yourself the Google Drive API. You get information about those files, their authors, their metadata, any tags that Google Drive may already have, and you can populate parts of the data model that Michael is showing right here. If you want to go a little bit deeper than that, that's where you get into extraction from the documents themselves. Now, a number of years ago, I would have like tried to get an open source NLP library, and I would have done a lot of work to do this. Nowadays, I just wouldn't do that at all. I would probably go to Google or Amazon or Azure, and I would use one of their cloud APIs for NLP and not code that stuff myself. Did Tomasz do that in this particular article,
Yeah,
Michael?
exactly. So Tomasz had a bunch of articles that so for instance, here's an article where he basically takes articles from Diffbot and then uses Google APIs for translation and entity extraction, for instance, as well.
Yeah, so all this stuff, okay, Neo4j AuraDB, it's a graph database as a service, and you're just going to find that everything that you could possibly want is available as a service out there. And so when we build apps like these, it's more like putting components or Lego blocks together, and it's less
Yeah.
like trying to figure out how to code the logic of how the NLP or entity extraction ought to work. A lot of those problems, somebody has given you like an 80% solution you can just use.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, Michael. You want to add anything on top of
No,
that?
it was, yeah, fully. So, and the sync is then, if you want to get updates when something is updated in Google Drive, there are like sync hooks that you then can tie into from the API and run it as a Google Cloud Run function or Lambda function or something like that. And then updates are also getting in automatically as well.
The use cases for those kinds of knowledge graphs are pretty much endless. I mean, when people extract this kind of stuff out of their documents, you can use it, for example, for simple things like dead link detection. If we know which document links to what other document, and we know that we just made a URL change, we can go identify all of the documents that might need to change because we changed the URL, just as a simple example.
Yeah.
Or you can search a massive corpus of documents for anything related to a particular topic in a way that's better than just like text or keyword search. So I know that a lot of law firms use this kind of approach. You know those scenes in the legal movies where somebody will come in with like 500 boxes of documents, and then the lawyers are buried and they don't really know what to do with all of this information. Well, increasingly, you know, what people can do is scan all of those documents in, create a knowledge graph out of it. And then what you do is you interact with the knowledge graph. You don't go read 35,000 pages of PDF, for example.
Exactly. I mean, this is a really nice example that goes back to the ICIJ and offshore leaks and Panama Papers and Pandora Papers and so on, right? So much of this information in here is also coming from PDF documents, from spreadsheets, from scanned contracts and other things, right? So, and then basically they defined all the relationships in the metadata of this, right? So who owns which shell company has been sold by when, by whom to whom, and all this other stuff is basically one gigantic knowledge graph, and then you can start enriching that from other sources as well.
Yeah, so
sources and so on, right? So there's a lot of possibilities.
You might be an individual that's interested in tracking like folks on Twitter who are talking about a particular topic. All of these same approaches will work for you just as a hobby side project. Or you might be a giant company who's interested in tracking this sort of stuff. But it's like when you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of documents coming at you per day, you're not going to read them. You have to have some way of automatically extracting and structuring metadata about that. And like, one of the things we talk about with graphs as being so nice is just the flexibility of them. And it really pays off in the knowledge graph case because you can't know ahead of time all of the things that you might need to store about the document. So that schema-free, flexible structure that you see inside of Cypher is just, it happens to be a really sweet fit for these kinds of things.
Exactly. Right. So that's also here is, for instance, the Twitter example where you can connect things through shared links, through hashtags. You have kind of meta networks that are above the Twitter network, like the retweet network, which is an amplification network, replies and so on. And similarly, documents exhibit similar structures as well, right? And I think many companies sit on like treasure troves of data that lives just in PDF documents or Word documents, so somewhere on file storage that they should actually extract and pull in so that they can make smarter decisions. And the one thing that I had before here, the NASA knowledge graph, that's exactly what they did. Basically, they had like gigantic database of mission reports, lessons learned database, but it was just document search, right? And they basically could only do text-based search, and they transformed it into knowledge graph, basically, which then allowed them to say, these are related documents. If you looked at this document, other people also looked at these other documents, right? So, or these documents are actually forming clusters of patterns of certain things that come together, and so on. So you can go much further than you would actually go from the pure text-based level as such.
Yeah, so I put a little bit of a fun poll up just because I'd love to see what people think in the background. But Michael, if you want, we were talking about Bloom a couple minutes ago. There's a couple of other things that might be interesting and useful to show about Bloom while we give people a chance on that.
Yeah. So we started to look at this search phrases here, right? So for instance, I put in a search phrase, parents of $name, right? So I just say, okay, this is a parameter, and I want to see parents of this person, right? So I say I find people that have a parent relationship to this person, parent, and let's say we go up to 5 hops or something like that, right? And then we can use this parameter up here in our Cypher query and return actually the path we get from this, right? So this is just a regular Cypher query. So, and then we can say, okay, this name suggestion can actually come even from our data. So we can say person actually last name, or let's say first name, right? P dot first actually, right? So, and if I save this, or it's automatically saved, I can now go into my Bloom and say parents of, and then it already gives us examples here, right? So I can say, for instance, Abraham, right? So I can just select this, and then I get clear the scene first, parents of Abraham. So these are like all people named Abraham that have parents in our graph here. And if we show for person first name actually as a caption, not last name, or actually you can show both in Bloom. And it's true why it's not refreshing that. Parents of. Then we see different Abrahams and their parents, basically in the US president's selection, right? So that's a search phrase that can do things on the input. So for an external user who's not a developer, for them these kind of search phrases are really useful. You can have multiple parameters and so on. So you can have even really complex Cypher queries hidden behind these search phrases. If things like you can also spell out patterns like this. So this should actually also look Abraham. Oh no, first name doesn't have an index. Sorry. So I would have to create an index for that. And then the other thing that you can also do in Bloom, which is really nice, is you can style things based on certain properties. So, for instance, I don't think we have value things on these nodes somewhere. Let's see. So we have here our domain nodes. Do they have anything yet? Let's imagine this Neo4j input ID would be something like an numeric value. Then we could say, we could style this by the value of this, and we would say Neo4j input ID is a range. And then I can say, why doesn't it allow me range here? Oh, because it's a string for me. And then, or I can say I want to have unique values, and then every node with a different value is styled differently, for instance, right? And I can do things like size control and other things as well. So we did an NFT AMA on Monday, where actually I can show you. I think I have the NFTs here somewhere. Import zip, not import model. So if I run the import against my database again, or AMA database of the NFTs, and there's still enough room in there, which I hope. So here now we have our NFTs, and in Bloom we can actually create a new perspective. And use this one. And if I delete these, okay, let me just do it like this. So these transaction nodes have actually price in US dollars, right? So if I go on transaction, actually I can say whole bit styling price US dollars, and this should be a range, and I want to apply it to the size and say small nodes to large, very large nodes or so, basically on the min point, which is like 0 to 100,000 or something like that, or 50,000. And then when I fetch these transaction nodes, they should actually be styled in different sizes. Why are they not styled in different sizes? We can do this again. Range, size, apply. Why are they all the same size? They should not be the same size. Refresh range. Okay. Now we probably see this. Oh yeah, now we see that, for instance, this node is much larger than this one over here, right? So it basically uses the transaction value on the NFT transactions for styling. And then you could also say, okay, a transaction can be styled by market, and then we say unique values per market, and we have 3 different markets or 4 different markets, and then we see that our transaction nodes get different colors, and then you already see that some markets have larger ones and smaller ones as such. So this one has, for instance, smaller ones in general. So that's also something that's really nice as such.
Yeah, things have been coming so quickly in Bloom. I got to brush up on a couple of these features myself, Michael. I haven't seen.
Oh, there's much more. There's
Yeah.
filtering and lots of other stuff. So we can actually do a whole session about it. Actually, don't we have a training class coming in March or so that also does a Bloom training? So I think that's also something for folks. If you want to learn more about this, then that's a good opportunity to join us there.
So we're reaching the end of the time, and I know like Alex will help us, close out here. There's only one other thing I'd like to mention, and that's if you are starting off with Aura and you want to figure out how to advance in your learning, there's a tutorial on our website called Building a Cipher Recommendation Engine, and sometimes I find it's easiest just to jump in and try to build something simple with a clear, clean learning path and get your hands dirty and see what you think, and then kind of go and develop from there. So lots of resources on our developer pages to get you started there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. No, I think that's good. That's good advice. Always check out the docs, the Graph Academy, the many resources we have available, the community forums, the Discord server, to exchange with other people and to answer questions or ask questions and find out what it is. And also, this format today hopefully was helpful. Thank you, David. Thank you, Michael, for presenting and for answering these many questions. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for your questions. Indeed, without your questions, this would have been, we could have talked about David's guitar lessons or Michael's books, but I mean, it's not the point. Thank you for that. Yeah, we will be back with another of these sessions probably in a month or so. So we keep you posted. We have another Neo4j live session tomorrow on geospatial, geograph, where I will be joined by Veronique from France. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you have the time, please join us then, tomorrow, 5 p.m. CET. And yeah, with that, thank you all for joining. Thank you for watching and participating, and try Aura yourself if you haven't done so. And maybe we see you next time with questions.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.